A rich Playboy makes a filthy offer at a charity party. A single mom answers without words. She flips him to the floor. The room gasps. The clip goes viral. She teaches self-defense at a small center. He shows up to apologize and keeps showing up. The town doesn't trust him. She doesn't either. Then her little boy whispers the line that stuns them all. "Mommy says you're my daddy." But behind the money is a secret that can break everything, a cruel game he never meant to finish. Donors pull out. Doors close. He trades his suit for a mop and tries to earn a second chance. This isn't about cash. It's about courage, faith, and a family on the line. When pride meets a mother's strength, will truth destroy them or build the home they've been praying for? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The aroma of pancakes filled Rachel Morgan's modest kitchen as morning sunlight streamed through the curtains. She expertly flipped another golden disc while keeping an eye on Danny, who bounced around the kitchen with endless 7-year-old energy. "Mom, can I have chocolate chips in mine, please?" Danny's brown eyes sparkled with hope as he clutched his favorite Superman cup filled with milk. Rachel smiled, adding a handful of chocolate chips to the batter. "Just this once, since you helped me organize the equipment bags for class yesterday." "Yes." Danny pumped his fist in victory, then carefully set the table with paper napkins and plastic plates, their Saturday morning routine. As Rachel stacked the pancakes, she glanced at the clock on the microwave. 2 hours until her women's self-defense class. The thought of her students brought both joy and worry to her heart. The center meant everything to her, a safe haven where women could learn to protect themselves and find their inner strength. "Danny, remember Mrs. Peterson is watching you during class today," Rachel said, setting his plate down. The chocolate chips had melted perfectly, creating little pockets of sweetness. "I know, Mom. Can I bring my new comic book?" Danny had already drowned his pancakes in syrup, creating a sticky pond on his plate. "Of course, sweetie. Just remember to thank her for her time." Rachel sat down with her own modest portion, savoring the quiet moment with her son. After breakfast, Rachel packed their gym bags, while Danny changed into his play clothes. Her black belt, worn but pristine, was carefully folded on top of her gi. She'd earned that belt through years of dedication, and now she used those skills to empower others. The community center was only a 10-minute walk from their small house. Danny skipped ahead, stopping to examine interesting rocks and fallen leaves along the way. Rachel breathed in the crisp morning air, grateful for these simple moments. The center's brick building looked welcoming despite its aging facade. Paint peeled near the entrance, and one of the windows needed replacing. But to Rachel, it was beautiful. This place had become her second home, a sanctuary where lives changed for the better. Inside, Rachel helped Danny settle in Mrs. Peterson's office with his comic books and snacks. The elderly secretary had been watching Danny during classes since he was a toddler, treating him like the grandson she never had. "There's my favorite young man." Mrs. Peterson welcomed Danny with a warm hug. "I brought butter cookies today." "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson." Danny's eyes lit up as he spotted the familiar tin container. Rachel touched Mrs. Peterson's shoulder gratefully. "You're a blessing, Helen. Thank you." In the main room, Rachel began setting up the mats. Some were worn thin, and she had to position them carefully to cover the spots where they were falling apart. Her students deserved better equipment, but the center's budget was stretched thin. Women began arriving 15 minutes before class. Sarah, a young mother of 2, helped arrange the last mats. Jenny, recently divorced and finding her confidence again, adjusted her new white belt with pride. Maria, a grandmother determined to stay strong for her family, led the others in warm-up stretches. "Good morning, everyone," Rachel called out, her voice carrying authority and warmth. "Today we're reviewing escape techniques and starting a new combination." The class moved through the exercises with determination. Rachel watched Carol, a domestic abuse survivor, execute a perfect wrist break. "Excellent form, Carol. Remember, it's not about strength. It's about technique and confidence." Carol's smile lit up her whole face. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. Halfway through class, Rachel demonstrated a hip throw on Sarah, who had volunteered as her partner. "Notice how I use my opponent's momentum against them. Power doesn't come from muscle alone. It comes from wisdom and proper technique." The women practiced in pairs, their movements becoming more fluid with each attempt. Rachel moved among them, adjusting stances and offering encouragement. These women were more than students, they were family. After class, several students lingered to chat. Maria showed pictures of her granddaughter's first steps. Jenny proudly announced she'd stood up to her ex-husband during their last custody exchange. Each story reinforced why Rachel had started these classes. Once everyone had left, Rachel cleaned the mats and stored the equipment. Danny helped by carrying the lighter items, chattering about the adventures of his favorite superheroes. That evening, after a simple dinner of mac and cheese, Danny's favorite, Rachel tucked her son into bed. He fell asleep quickly, clutching his worn teddy bear. Rachel watched him for a moment, her heart full of love for this precious boy who made every struggle worthwhile. With Danny peaceful beside her, Rachel spread the bills across her small desk. The center's utility notice showed an outstanding balance that made her stomach clench. The equipment replacement fund was empty, and next month's rent loomed ahead. Numbers danced before her eyes as she calculated and recalculated, trying to make everything work. Rachel glanced at Danny's sleeping form and whispered a quiet prayer. Lord, please show me a way to keep the center running. These women need this place. I need this place. She brushed away a tear, trying to hold on to faith despite the mounting pressure. The moonlight cast soft shadows through the window as Rachel continued reviewing the unpaid bills, each one a reminder of the challenge ahead. But as she looked at her sleeping son's peaceful face, she knew she had to find a way. Too many lives depended on it. Rachel stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing down the dark blue cocktail dress she'd found at the local consignment shop. The hemline hid just above her knees, and though the fabric showed slight signs of wear, it still held an elegant shape. Her reflection revealed a woman both uncomfortable and determined, someone more at home in workout clothes than evening wear. You look like a princess, Mommy, Danny called from her doorway, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Rachel smiled, adjusting the thin silver necklace her mother had given her years ago. Thank you, sweetie. Are you sure you'll be okay with Mrs. Peterson tonight? We're going to make pizza and watch cartoons, Danny said, bouncing on his toes. But why can't I come to the party? This is a grown-up party, honey. Rachel knelt carefully in her dress, meeting his eyes. Sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do, because they might help us help others. Remember how we talked about the community center needing help? Danny nodded solemnly. To keep teaching the ladies how to be strong? That's right. Rachel touched his cheek softly. And tonight, I might meet people who can help us keep the center open. The doorbell chimed, and Danny raced to answer it. Rachel heard Mrs. Peterson's warm greeting echo through their small house. The elderly woman had been a godsend since Rachel moved to the neighborhood, often watching Danny for free when money was tight. Rachel, dear, you look lovely, Mrs. Peterson exclaimed as Rachel entered the living room. She was a plump woman with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. Sarah from church told me she's picking you up? Yes, any minute now. Rachel gathered her small clutch purse, another consignment find, and checked its contents: phone, keys, and the few business cards she'd printed at the library advertising her self-defense classes. Danny hugged her legs. Bring me back a cookie? Rachel laughed, ruffling his hair. I'll see what I can do. Be good for Mrs. Peterson, okay? A car horn honked outside. Rachel peeked through the curtains to see Sarah's SUV in the driveway, its headlights bright in the early evening darkness. That's my ride. Rachel kissed Danny's forehead and squeezed Mrs. Peterson's hand. Thank you again. I won't be too late. Sarah waited behind the wheel, looking polished in a red dress that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly rent. Get in, girl. We're going to be fashionably late as it is. Rachel slid into the passenger seat, already feeling out of place. I still think this is a waste of time, Sarah. These charity galas aren't exactly my scene. Nonsense, Sarah said, pulling away from the curb. The Children's Hospital Foundation always draws the city's biggest donors, and some of them might be interested in supporting your work at the center. You just need to put yourself out there. The drive to the Grand Plaza Hotel took 20 minutes, during which Sarah briefed Rachel on who's who in the local charity circuit. Rachel tried to absorb it all, but the names and connections blurred together like a complicated family tree. The hotel lobby buzzed with activity as they arrived. Well-dressed couples streamed toward the ballroom, the women in designer dresses and sparkling jewelry, the men in tailored suits. Rachel clutched her purse tighter, feeling the worn fabric of her dress like a spotlight on her outsider status. "Come on." Sarah linked their arms. "Let's get you a drink and start mingling." The ballroom took Rachel's breath away despite her reservations. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over dozens of round tables dressed in white linens. Ice sculptures gleamed on buffet tables laden with elegant hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in one corner, while waiters in black ties wove through the crowd with champagne trays. "Sarah, you made it." A woman in her 50s approached, air-kissing Sarah's cheeks. "And who is this?" "Linda. Meet Rachel Morgan. She runs the women's program at the Riverside Community Center." "Rachel." Linda chairs the Hospital Foundation's board. Rachel shook Linda's hand, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "It's nice to meet you. The ballroom looks beautiful." "Oh, thank you, dear. We're hoping to raise record amounts tonight. The pediatric wing desperately needs updating." Linda's attention shifted as more guests arrived. "Do excuse me. Sarah, don't forget the silent auction closes at 9. They made their way to the bar, where Sarah ordered 2 glasses of wine. Rachel sipped hers slowly, knowing she needed to keep her wits sharp. The room grew more crowded as they stood near a tall cocktail table, Sarah pointing out various local celebrities and business leaders. A ripple of excitement suddenly moved through the crowd near the entrance. Rachel looked up to see what caused the stir, and her heart sank a little at the scene. A tall man had just made his entrance, commanding attention without trying. He wore a tuxedo that probably cost more than her car, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile gleaming white as he laughed at something his date whispered. The woman beside him looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, her red dress leaving little to the imagination. "That's Chase Whitmore," Sarah whispered, though her tone suggested Rachel should already know the name. "He's donated millions to various charities, but he's also known for..." She trailed off meaningfully. Rachel watched as Chase Whitmore worked the room, his presence drawing people like moths to a flame. Every gesture screamed entitled wealth, the casual way he handed his empty glass to a waiter without looking, the practiced charm as he greeted other guests, the proprietary hand he kept at his date's waist. "He seems charming," Rachel said dryly, taking another sip of wine. Sarah laughed. "Oh, he is. He's also arrogant, spoiled, and goes through women like most people go through tissues. But his family practically built this city, and his business deals are legendary." Rachel observed as Chase threw his head back in another loud laugh at something someone said, his perfect teeth flashing. Everything about him radiated the kind of confident privilege that set her teeth on edge. She'd met his type before, men who thought money could buy anything or anyone. "Well," Rachel said quietly, turning away from the spectacle, "I think I'll focus my networking elsewhere tonight." The charity gala sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Rachel moved carefully through the crowd, feeling like an outsider among the designer dresses and expensive jewelry. She'd positioned herself near the refreshment table, finding comfort in having something to do with her hands as she sipped water from a delicate glass. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter, most of it revolving around pledges and donations. Rachel watched as wealthy patrons wrote checks with casual flicks of their wrists, amounts that could keep her community center running for months. Her church friend Sarah had disappeared into the crowd, leaving Rachel to navigate this unfamiliar world alone. "You seem lost," a deep voice said behind her. Rachel turned to find Chase Whitmore standing closer than comfort allowed. His cologne was expensive and overwhelming, matching his tailored black tuxedo that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Up close, his features were striking. Strong jaw, perfectly styled dark hair, and green eyes that carried an unsettling mixture of amusement and calculation. "I'm fine, thank you," Rachel replied curtly, taking a step back only to find herself against the table's edge. Chase moved forward, maintaining the uncomfortable proximity. "I've been watching you all evening. You're different from the usual crowd here." His eyes traveled down her dress and back up, making her skin crawl. "More authentic." Rachel's fingers tightened around her water glass. "Mr. Whitmore, I'd appreciate some space." He chuckled, the sound lacking warmth. "Please, call me Chase, and I always give beautiful women what they want." He paused, a smug grin spreading across his face. For the right price, of course. The surrounding conversation seemed to fade as Chase leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. I'll give you 50, zero to sleep with me. Time seemed to stop. Rachel felt heat rise to her face, not from embarrassment, but from pure fury. The water glass trembled in her grip as the full weight of his words sank in. Excuse me? Her voice was deadly quiet. Chase's grin widened, clearly mistaking her reaction for consideration. Come on, sweetheart. I've seen how you keep eyeing the donation board. 50. Zero could solve a lot of problems for someone like you. He reached for her arm. What do you say we discuss the details somewhere more private? In that moment, Rachel's years of martial arts training took over. Her movements were fluid, precise, and lightning fast. She set down her glass and caught his reaching hand, using his own momentum against him. Before Chase could process what was happening, she had twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him to bend forward at an awkward angle. Let me make something very clear, Mr. Whitmore, Rachel said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence that had fallen over the nearby guests. I am not for sale. Not for 50,000, not for 50 million. Chase's face had turned red, both from the position and the humiliation. Let go of me, he gasped, but Rachel maintained the hold firmly. I teach women's self-defense at my community center, she continued, her tone controlled despite her anger. I show them how to deal with entitled men who think money gives them the right to degrade women. Would you like me to demonstrate some other techniques? By now, a circle of onlookers had formed around them. Phones were out, recording the scene. Chase's date stood among them, her perfectly made-up face showing equal parts, shock and satisfaction. You're hurting me, Chase wheezed. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. Rachel released him with a small push, causing him to stumble forward. He straightened up, tugging at his jacket while trying to salvage what remained of his dignity. The gathered crowd whispered and pointed, several women nodding in approval at Rachel's actions. For future reference, Rachel said, loud enough for everyone to hear, women deserve respect, not price tags. She turned on her heel, head held high, and walked straight toward the exit. The crowd parted before her like water, some people actually applauding as she passed. Behind her, she could hear Chase's sputtering attempts to laugh it off, but his humiliation was complete. As Rachel pushed through the heavy doors into the cool night air, her hands finally began to shake, not from fear or regret, but from the pure adrenaline of standing up for herself and everything she believed in. Her old dress might not have been designer, but she wore her dignity like armor, and no amount of money could strip that away. She took a deep breath, thinking of Danny waiting at home with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. She might not have walked away with any donations tonight, but she'd shown her son's future self exactly how to treat women, even if he'd never know about this particular lesson. The valet brought her tired Honda around, and Rachel slid behind the wheel, leaving behind the glittering gala and its superficial world. She had classes to teach tomorrow, women to empower, and a son to raise right. That was worth more than all the money Chase Whitmore could ever offer. Rachel's phone buzzed incessantly on her nightstand, jolting her awake. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of her modest bedroom. She reached for the device, squinting at the screen filled with notifications. Messages, missed calls, and social media alerts flooded her display. Mommy, Danny called from the kitchen. Miss Sarah from church is on TV, and you're there too. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She jumped out of bed, not bothering to change out of her worn pajamas, and rushed to the living room. Danny sat cross-legged on their threadbare carpet, pointing excitedly at their small television set. The local morning news was playing a shaky cell phone video. Rachel's stomach dropped as she watched herself in her second-hand dress, executing a perfect wrist lock on Chase Whitmore. The anchor's voice carried a note of admiration. In a powerful moment caught on camera last night, local self-defense instructor Rachel Morgan showed exactly why women shouldn't be underestimated. Oh no, Rachel whispered, sinking onto their worn couch. The video continued playing, showing Chase's shocked expression as she twisted his arm behind his back. The camera caught her final words clearly. Money doesn't give you the right to disrespect women. Danny bounced up and down. That was so cool. You're like a superhero, Mommy. Rachel's phone rang again. This time it was Lisa, one of her regular students. Rachel, have you seen the news? You're everywhere. That creep totally deserved it. Everywhere? Rachel's voice cracked. She grabbed the remote and started flipping through channels. Sure enough, 3 different local stations were running the story. One had even tracked down her website, showing pictures of her community center classes. "The internet is going crazy," Lisa continued. "Everyone's sharing your video. You're trending. People are calling you the hero mom who stood up to that entitled jerk." Rachel's other line beeped, then beeped again. She glanced at her phone, 5 new voicemails, and dozens of unread messages. "Lisa, I have to go. This is overwhelming." After hanging up, Rachel sat Danny down with his breakfast and retreated to her room to get dressed. Her hands trembled as she pulled on her favorite teaching outfit, clean black yoga pants and a modest navy polo with her center's logo. The phone kept ringing. Finally, she answered a call from Maria, the elderly volunteer who helped manage the community center's front desk. "Rachel, dear, you need to get down here. The phone won't stop ringing. Women want to sign up for your classes." Rachel grabbed her keys, hustled Danny into his shoes, and drove to the center. The familiar brick building looked the same as always, a little worn around the edges, with fading paint and a crack in one window. But something was different. Cars filled the small parking lot, and a group of women stood near the entrance, talking animatedly. "There she is," someone called out as Rachel helped Danny from the car. A few women started clapping. Rachel felt her face flush as she made her way to the door, holding Danny's hand tightly. Inside, Maria was overwhelmed at the desk, scribbling names and numbers on every scrap of paper she could find. "Thank goodness you're here. The phone's been ringing since 6 this morning. We have 37 women who want to sign up for classes." Rachel steadied herself against the desk. 37? Their biggest class had never been more than 12 students. The center's budget was so tight, she'd been worried about making rent next month. And counting. Maria beamed, answering another call. "Yes, ma'am. Yes, that's right. The same instructor from the video. Would you like me to add your name to the list?" Danny tugged at Rachel's shirt. "Can I play in the kids' corner while you work, Mommy?" Rachel nodded, watching as her son settled in with his coloring books. More women were coming through the door now, some carrying newspaper clippings, others holding up their phones with the viral video playing. A young woman with nervous eyes approached Rachel. "I saw what you did," she said quietly. "How you stood up to him. I need to learn how to do that. How to be strong like you." Rachel's throat tightened with emotion. This was why she'd started teaching in the first place, to help women find their inner strength. "The first class is tonight at 6, she said warmly. "We'd love to have you join us." Maria waved another stack of papers. "Rachel, we're going to need more registration forms. And maybe a bigger classroom." For the first time since the incident, Rachel felt a spark of hope. The video might have been embarrassing, but it was bringing women to the center. Women who needed help, who wanted to learn, who were ready to change their lives. Maybe this unexpected attention could keep her dream alive. She walked over to the bulletin board where she'd posted this month's budget concerns. The column of red numbers had been keeping her up at night. But now, with all these new students, Rachel took a deep breath and offered up a silent prayer of gratitude. A reporter appeared at the door with a cameraman. "Ms. Morgan, would you be willing to say a few words about last night's incident?" Rachel started to decline, but then she saw more women arriving, their faces full of determination and hope. These were the people she'd been trying to reach all along. Maybe this was her chance to make a real difference in her community. "I'll make a statement," she said firmly. "But first, let me tell you about our classes and what we're trying to achieve here. This center isn't about taking men down. It's about lifting women up." The rhythmic sound of bodies hitting exercise mats filled the community center's main room. Rachel moved between her students, adjusting stances and offering encouragement. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. "Remember, ladies, it's all about leverage, not strength," Rachel demonstrated, helping a petite woman perfect her stance. "When someone grabs you from behind, the heavy metal door creaked open. Rachel's words died in her throat. Chase Whitmore stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the afternoon light. Instead of his usual designer suit, he wore casual clothes, dark jeans, and a gray sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The confidence she remembered from the gala was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. The room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes darted between Rachel and Chase. Some of her students whispered, recognizing him from the viral video. Others straightened their postures, tension evident in their movements. "Class, take 5, Rachel called out, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. She turned to Chase, crossing her arms. "This is a women's self-defense class. Men aren't allowed." Chase cleared his throat, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I know. I'd like to speak with you privately, if possible." His voice was quieter than she remembered, missing its usual arrogant edge. "I came to apologize." Rachel studied him, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the slight wrinkle in his otherwise immaculate shirt. He looked troubled, different from the smug businessman who'd propositioned her at the gala. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here," Rachel replied firmly, aware of her students watching the exchange with intense interest. "Please," Chase said, and something in his tone made her pause. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Rachel glanced at her class. Most of them nodded encouragingly, though a few showed concern. She sighed, turning to her senior student. "Sarah, lead them through the next set of drills. I'll be right back." She led Chase to the small office adjacent to the main room, leaving the door open. The space was cramped, filled with filing cabinets and a desk that had seen better days. A child's crayon drawing hung on the wall, Danny's latest masterpiece. "Make it quick," Rachel said, maintaining a professional distance. "I have a class to teach." Chase shifted uncomfortably, looking out of place among the modest surroundings. "I was wrong," he began. "What I did at the gala, it was inexcusable. He paused, searching for words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few days." "That must be new for you," Rachel couldn't help saying. A flash of hurt crossed his face, but he nodded. "I deserve that. Look, I know money can't fix what I did, but I want to help. Your center here," he gestured at the peeling paint and outdated equipment visible through the office window. "It's doing important work. Let me fund an expansion, new equipment, better facilities." Rachel's jaw tightened. "So that's what this is about? Trying to buy your way out of embarrassment?" "No," Chase protested quickly. "It's not like that. The sound of running footsteps interrupted them. Danny burst into the office, his backpack still on, cheeks flushed from running. Mom, I got an A on my math test." Rachel's heart melted at her son's excitement, momentarily forgetting Chase's presence. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of—" "Who are you?" Danny asked, noticing Chase. His bright eyes studied the tall stranger with unabashed curiosity. Chase seemed startled by the child's sudden appearance, but recovered quickly. He crouched down to Danny's level, his expression softening. "I'm Chase. You must be Danny." "How'd you know my name?" Danny asked, tilting his head. I've heard about you from your mom," Chase replied carefully, extending his hand. "Congratulations on your math test." Danny beamed, shaking Chase's hand with enthusiasm. "Thanks. Mom says math is important if you want to run a business." "Do you run a business?" Rachel watched the interaction with mixed emotions. Chase's face had transformed completely while talking to Danny, the mask of wealthy indifference replaced by genuine warmth. "I do," Chase answered. "But your mom's business is much more important than mine. She helps people." Danny nodded seriously. "She's the strongest person in the whole world. She can flip bad guys twice her size." A small smile tugged at Chase's lips. "I know. I've seen it firsthand." Rachel cleared her throat. "Danny, honey, why don't you start your homework in the reading corner? I need to finish talking to Mr. Whitmore." "Okay," Danny agreed cheerfully. He gave Chase another bright smile before bouncing out of the office. Chase stood up slowly, his expression thoughtful. "He's a great kid." "He is," Rachel agreed softly. Then, firming her voice, "Look, I appreciate the apology, but I'm not interested in your money. What happened at the gala is done. Let's leave it at that." "At least think about it," Chase insisted, pulling out a business card. "The offer stands. No strings attached." He placed the card on her desk, then paused. "For what it's worth, seeing you with Danny, I understand now why what I did was so wrong. You're not just some woman at a party. You're someone's mother, someone's teacher, someone's—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable again. "I'm sorry. Really." Rachel didn't take the card, but she didn't throw it away either. "Your 5 minutes are up, Mr. Whitmore. I have a class to teach." Chase nodded, accepting the dismissal. As he walked past the main room, Danny waved goodbye from his corner, already absorbed in his homework. Chase waved back, a strange expression crossing his face, something between regret and longing. Rachel watched him leave, then turned back to her waiting students, pushing aside the confusing mix of emotions his visit had stirred up. "All right, ladies," she called out, clapping her hands. "Let's get back to work." But even as she demonstrated the next set of moves, she could feel the weight of Chase's business card on her desk, and the echo of Danny's innocent smile lingered in her mind. Morning sunlight streamed through the small kitchen window of Rachel's modest home, casting warm patches on the well-worn linoleum floor. Danny sat at their tiny breakfast table, his legs swinging beneath his chair as he munched on his Cheerios. Rachel stood at the counter, packing his lunch for school while her own coffee cooled beside her. "Mom?" Danny's spoon clinked against his bowl. "How come that tall man yesterday looked so sad?" Rachel's hands stilled over the peanut butter sandwich she was making. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "The man at your class." He smiled, but his eyes were sad. Danny stirred his cereal thoughtfully. "Like Tommy at school when he talks about not having a dad." Rachel's chest tightened. Leave it to her perceptive son to pick up on things most adults missed. She turned around, leaning against the counter. "Mr. Whitmore, he's just someone who came to apologize for being rude at a party. Does he have a family?" Danny's innocent question hit her like a punch to the gut. I don't really know him, honey." Rachel busied herself with closing Danny's lunchbox. "Everyone should have a family," Danny declared with the simple wisdom of a 7-year-old. "Maybe that's why he's sad." Rachel walked over and smoothed Danny's unruly brown hair. "You have such a big heart, sweetheart. But some people, well, they make choices that keep them from having real connections with others." "What kind of choices?" Rachel thought about Chase's cruel offer at the gala, his smug smile as he'd tried to buy her like some commodity. "Sometimes people think money is more important than being kind or respectful to others." "But he brought you flowers yesterday," Danny pointed out. "The yellow ones." "Those were nice." Rachel glanced at the daisies Chase had left behind after his surprise visit to her class. She'd been too shocked to refuse them, and Danny had already excitedly put them in water before she could throw them out. They sat on the windowsill now, cheerfully innocent of their giver's reputation. "Finish your breakfast, buddy. We need to get you to school." The rest of their morning routine went smoothly, but Rachel couldn't shake the unease that followed her through the day. She taught her morning classes at the center, went to her part-time bookkeeping job, and returned for evening self-defense classes, all while Chase Whitmore's unexpected appearance yesterday kept nagging at her thoughts. He'd seemed different somehow, more subdued than at the gala. The designer swagger was still there, but something in his eyes when he'd apologized. Danny was right. There had been sadness there, hidden beneath the polished exterior. "Focus, Rachel," she muttered to herself, as she demonstrated a defensive move to her evening class. "He's probably just trying to repair his bruised ego after the video went viral." The class worked through their drills, the familiar routine helping Rachel center herself. These women trusted her to teach them strength and confidence. She couldn't let herself get distracted by enigmatic playboys with sad eyes and expensive apology flowers. As the last student left for the night, Rachel began her closing routine, straightening mats, wiping down equipment, checking the locks on the windows. She was just shouldering her gym bag when she pushed open the front door and stopped short. Chase Whitmore stood in the parking lot next to a sleek black SUV, illuminated by the security lights. But instead of another bouquet, he was surrounded by sports equipment, new exercise mats, training pads, boxing gloves, and what looked like complete sets of protective gear. "Before you say no," he said quickly, holding up his hands in a peaceful gesture, "this isn't about you. It's for your students." Rachel crossed her arms. "Mr. Whitmore, Chase, please. Mr. Whitmore," she continued firmly. "If this is some attempt to ease your conscience about the gala, it's not." He ran a hand through his dark hair, messing up its careful styling. "Well, maybe partly, but mainly." He gestured to the equipment. "I saw how worn out your current gear is. These women you're teaching, they deserve proper tools for learning to protect themselves." Rachel studied him in the harsh fluorescent light. He'd changed into workout clothes, expensive ones, but practical. No designer suit, no flashy watch. Just a man standing in a parking lot, looking almost nervous as he waited for her response. "Why are you really here?" she asked quietly. Chase was silent for a long moment, his hands in his pockets. Because what you're doing matters, he finally said. And because I've spent too much of my life throwing money at things that don't. Rachel uncrossed her arms slowly. The equipment was professional grade. Exactly what her students needed, but what the center could never afford. Her pride warred with practicality. This doesn't make us friends, she said at last. A slight smile touched his lips. Understood. And it doesn't erase what happened at the gala. I wouldn't expect it to. Rachel sighed, then walked over to examine one of the training pads. It was top quality, the kind she'd only seen in professional dojos. The women can really use these, she admitted. Then let me help unload them. Chase moved toward the SUV's trunk, then paused. Unless you'd rather I leave them here and go? Rachel should say yes, should tell him to drop off the equipment and leave her center and her life alone. But something in his careful distance, the way he was trying to respect her boundaries while still wanting to help, it made her hesitate. You can help unload, she said finally, but only because these mats are heavy. Saturday afternoon brought a crisp autumn breeze to the community center's parking lot. Rachel adjusted Danny's jacket as they walked from their old sedan toward the building's entrance. Her son bounced with excitement. He loved helping out at the kids' workshops, almost as much as he enjoyed participating in them. Mom, look! Chase brought more stuff! Danny pointed eagerly at the familiar black SUV, where Chase was unloading colorful training gear sized for children. Rachel's stomach did a small flip. She hadn't expected him to show up today, though he'd been dropping by regularly with donations over the past week. Each time, he'd been respectful, keeping his distance while still showing genuine interest in the center's needs. Good afternoon, Chase called out, his arms full of foam training pads and bright primary colors. His usual designer suit was replaced with comfortable athletic wear, though Rachel noted it probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. Hi, Chase, Danny ran ahead, leaving Rachel no choice but to follow. Are those for us? Sure are, buddy, Chase smiled, and Rachel noticed again how different it was from his arrogant smirk at the gala. This smile reached his eyes, softening his whole face. Think you could help me carry some of this inside? Can I, Mom? Danny looked at her pleadingly. Rachel nodded, watching as Chase handed her son the lightest items. Just the foam pads, Danny. Nothing heavy. I've got the heavy stuff, Chase assured her, hefting a box of equipment. Unless you'd rather I didn't stay? The question was genuine, without a trace of manipulation. Rachel found herself shaking her head. No, it's fine. We could use the help setting up. Inside, other families were already arriving. Rachel's Saturday workshops had become increasingly popular, especially since the viral video incident. Parents wanted their children to learn basic self-defense in a safe, nurturing environment. Where should I put these? Chase asked, following Rachel's lead. Over by the blue mats, she directed, watching as Danny proudly carried his armload of equipment alongside Chase. Her son chatted happily about his school day, and to Rachel's surprise, Chase listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about Danny's favorite subjects and friends. As they set up the training area, Rachel couldn't help but notice how naturally Chase interacted with the children who began gathering around him, curious about the new equipment. He demonstrated proper ways to hold the pads, making them laugh with exaggerated expressions when they practiced their kicks. He's good with kids, observed Sarah, one of the regular moms, as she helped Rachel arrange the sign-in sheets. Rachel tensed slightly. He's just helping out. Sarah's knowing smile made Rachel flush. The workshop began, and Rachel focused on teaching basic self-defense moves to the excited group of children. Chase stayed in the background, holding pads when needed and offering encouragement to the shyer kids. Danny bounced between helping his mother demonstrate moves and showing off his own skills to Chase. Watch this, Danny called out, executing a perfect forward roll that Rachel had taught him. Impressive, Chase applauded, his face genuine with admiration. You must practice a lot. Mom teaches me every day, Danny beamed. She says I'm her best student. Rachel felt a warm glow watching them interact. Despite her initial misgivings about Chase, she couldn't deny he had a gentle way with children that contradicted his public image as a callous playboy. The afternoon passed quickly. As parents began collecting their children, Chase helped clean up, stacking mats and gathering scattered equipment. Danny insisted on helping too, though his idea of helping mostly involved testing out the new gear one last time. Thank you, Rachel said quietly as Chase loaded the last of the supplies into the storage closet. The kids really enjoyed the new equipment. They're great kids, Chase replied, watching Danny demonstrate another role for Sarah's daughter. You've built something special here, Rachel. The simple sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Before she could respond, Danny came running over. Mom, can Chase walk home with us? Please? I want to show him the shortcut through the park. Rachel hesitated. They'd maintained careful boundaries since the gala incident, despite Chase's regular appearances at the center. Walking home together felt too familiar. But Danny's hopeful expression was hard to resist, and Chase quickly added, Only if your mom's comfortable with it. I understand if... Please, Mom? Danny's eyes grew wider. I promised to show him all the safe crossing spots you taught me. Rachel found herself nodding, though her heart fluttered nervously. All right, but just this once. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as they walked, Danny skipping ahead to point out his favorite landmarks. The big oak tree where squirrels gathered, the corner store that sold the best candy, the crossing guard spot where Mrs. Peterson always gave him high fives. Chase listened to Danny's tour with genuine interest, asking questions that made the boy beam with pride at his knowledge of the neighborhood. Rachel walked beside them, watching their interaction with a mixture of warmth and caution. And that's where I found the lucky penny last week, Danny explained, pointing to a crack in the sidewalk. Mom says finding pennies means angels are watching over you. Is that so? Chase glanced at Rachel, his expression soft. Your mom sounds very wise. They were nearly home when Danny suddenly stopped, tugging on Chase's coat sleeve. Rachel watched as her son beckoned Chase to lean down, presumably to share a secret. Her heart warmed at the innocent gesture, until she heard Danny's whispered words. Mommy says you're my daddy. Rachel's world tilted sharply. What? She gasped, her voice strangled. Danny, where did you hear that? The warmth of the autumn evening seemed to vanish as Rachel stared at her son, then at Chase's shocked face. Danny looked confused by their reactions, while Chase stood frozen, his expression unreadable. Danny, Rachel's voice shook slightly. Where did you hear that? Tell me right now. The entire walk home had been transformed in an instant, leaving Rachel reeling as she waited for her son's answer. The comfortable rapport they'd built over the afternoon crumbled under the weight of those 5 whispered words, and Rachel could feel her carefully constructed walls threatening to collapse. Chapter 7. The Whisper That Changes Everything. Scene 2. Rachel's hands trembled as she placed Danny's favorite dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets on his plate. The kitchen felt smaller than usual, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Her mind kept replaying that moment outside the community center, Chase's startled expression, Danny's innocent smile, and her own racing heart. Sweetheart, Rachel began softly, sliding into the chair across from her son. We need to talk about what you said to Mr. Whitmore. Danny looked up from his plate, ketchup dotting the corner of his mouth. About him being my daddy? Rachel's chest tightened. Yes, about that. You said you heard me say that. When did you hear me say something like that? Danny pushed a chicken nugget around his plate, his small face scrunched in concentration. It was a long time ago, when I was littler. He paused, reaching for his juice box. You were in your room, and I heard you talking to God. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She remembered those nights, countless evenings spent on her knees beside her bed, praying through tears while Danny slept. Or so she'd thought. I woke up to get water, Danny continued, his voice small but clear. You were saying, please be the father Danny never had. And then when Mr. Chase started coming to help us, he shrugged, as if the connection was obvious to his 7-year-old mind. Rachel reached across the table to hold her son's small hand. Oh, Danny, when I was praying, I wasn't talking about Mr. Whitmore. I was asking God himself to be like a father to you. Danny's forehead wrinkled in confusion. But God's in heaven. How can he be my daddy here? He watches over us in special ways, Rachel explained, her voice gentle. Sometimes through other people, like your teachers, or Pastor Mike, or even our neighbors. But Mr. Whitmore, she hesitated, searching for the right words. He's just someone who's helping at the community center. But he makes you smile sometimes, Danny pointed out, his eyes bright with hope. Like when he brought those new blue mats for your class, and he helped me with my soccer kicks last week. Rachel felt her cheeks warm. She hadn't realized Danny had been watching their interactions so closely. Being nice to someone doesn't mean they're going to be your daddy, sweetie. It's more complicated than that. Why? The simple question carried the weight of years of wondering. Rachel's eyes stung with unshed tears. Because grown-ups have to be very sure about these things. We have to be careful with our hearts and with who we trust. Don't you trust Mr. Chase? Danny asked, pushing his plate aside. He said my kick was getting really good, and he knows how to fix the drinking fountain that always spits water everywhere. Rachel couldn't help but smile at her son's simple logic. The truth was, Chase had shown a different side of himself lately. The arrogant businessman from the gala seemed far removed from the man who spent last Saturday afternoon teaching kids proper stretching techniques and fixing broken equipment. Trust takes time to build, she explained carefully. Like when you're learning a new karate move, you have to practice it over and over before you can do it right. Danny nodded sagely, familiar with this concept. So, maybe Mr. Chase is practicing? The innocent observation struck Rachel silent for a moment. She thought about Chase's awkward attempts at apology, his genuine interest in the center's needs, the way his usual swagger disappeared when he worked with the kids. Maybe he is, she admitted softly. But that still doesn't mean he's going to be your daddy, and it wasn't right to tell him that, even if you thought it was true. Danny's lower lip trembled slightly. I'm sorry, Mommy. I just thought, when I saw you laughing at his jokes yesterday. Come here, Rachel said, opening her arms. Danny slid off his chair and climbed into her lap, snuggling close like he used to when he was smaller. You don't need to be sorry for wanting a daddy. That's a normal thing to want. But we have to trust God's timing, okay? And in the meantime, you have me, and I love you more than anything in the whole world. More than chocolate cake? Way more than chocolate cake, Rachel assured him, kissing the top of his head. Now finish your dinner, and then it's bath time. Later that night, after Danny was tucked in bed with his favorite stuffed tiger, Rachel sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of crickets through the slightly open window. She wrapped her hands around a cooling mug of tea, trying to sort through her tangled thoughts. Danny's words had stripped away the careful barrier she'd built around her heart. She'd been so focused on keeping Chase at arm's length, on protecting herself and Danny from disappointment, that she hadn't fully acknowledged how much things had changed since that first horrible encounter at the gala. The image of Chase's face when Danny made his announcement wouldn't leave her mind. There had been confusion, yes, but also something else. A softening around his eyes, a vulnerability she'd never seen before. He hadn't laughed it off or made a joke. Instead, he'd stood there, completely still, looking at Danny with an expression that made Rachel's heart skip a beat. Rachel took a sip of her tea, grimacing when she realized it had gone cold. Everything felt more complicated now. The careful distance she'd maintained, the professional politeness she'd insisted upon, it all seemed inadequate in the face of her son's simple hope and Chase's unexpected gentleness. She could still push Chase away, she thought. Could still maintain those protective walls she'd built so carefully, but Danny's words had created a crack in her defenses, one that wouldn't be easily repaired. Because the truth was, somewhere between Chase's awkward apologies and his genuine efforts to help, something had shifted. The man she'd dismissed as nothing more than an arrogant playboy had shown glimpses of someone else entirely, someone who might be worth getting to know. Rachel pressed her fingers to her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. The peaceful routine she'd built for herself and Danny suddenly felt precarious, teetering on the edge of change. Chase's confused but softened expression from earlier that evening flashed through her mind again, making her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. Monday morning arrived with a mix of autumn chill and golden sunlight streaming through the community center's windows. Rachel was arranging the blue practice mats when she heard the familiar squeak of the front door. Her shoulders tensed as footsteps approached the training room. Chase stood in the doorway, dressed down in khaki pants and a navy sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Gone was his usual swagger, replaced by an almost hesitant demeanor. "Before you ask me to leave," he said, holding up his hands, "I just want to watch, to understand what you do here." Rachel straightened up, crossing her arms. "This is a women's class, Mr. Whitmore. A safe space." "I know." He took a careful step forward. "But after what Danny said, I've been thinking. I throw money at charities all the time, but I've never actually seen what they do, never understood the people behind them." The sincerity in his voice gave Rachel pause. She studied his face, searching for any trace of his usual arrogance. Instead, she found something unfamiliar. Vulnerability. "Fine," she said finally. "But there are rules. You sit in the corner. No talking, no interfering, no making anyone uncomfortable. And if even one woman objects to your presence, you leave immediately." Chase nodded solemnly. "Understood." Rachel pointed to a folding chair in the far corner. "The mats need to be arranged in rows. Don't help, just observe." As she continued setting up, women began filtering in. Most wore workout clothes that had seen better days, but they carried themselves with quiet dignity. Maria, a middle-aged hotel housekeeper, was the first to notice Chase. "Is everything okay, Rachel?" she asked in Spanish, casting a worried glance his way. "Yes," Rachel assured her. "He's just here to observe. If you're uncomfortable—" No, Maria waved her hand. "As long as you trust him." "I don't," Rachel said honestly. "But I'm giving him a chance to learn." More women arrived. Sarah, a young widow with 2 kids. Judy, who'd left an abusive marriage 6 months ago. Teresa, a night shift nurse. Each one noticed Chase, but after quick whispered conversations with Rachel, they accepted his presence with cautious tolerance. As Rachel demonstrated a basic wrist escape, she kept glancing at Chase. He sat perfectly still, watching with intense focus. His usual mask of casual indifference was gone, replaced by genuine concentration as he observed the women practicing the move. "Remember," Rachel called out, "it's not about strength. It's about leverage and confidence. Your attacker expects you to freeze or panic. They don't expect you to act." Chase leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. Rachel wondered if he was remembering their encounter at the gala, when she'd used similar techniques on him. During a water break, Teresa approached the mat stack, struggling with a heavy roll. Before Rachel could intervene, Chase stood up. "May I?" he asked softly, keeping his distance until Teresa nodded. His expensive sweater collected dust as he helped position the mat. Rachel noticed he didn't try to take over or mansplain. He simply followed Teresa's directions about where to place it. "Thank you," Teresa said, surprising Rachel with a small smile. As the class progressed, more women began sneaking glances at Chase, not fearful ones, but curious. When Sarah dropped her water bottle, he retrieved it without fanfare. When Maria's teenage daughter arrived early for pickup, he immediately vacated his chair so she could sit. These small gestures didn't erase Rachel's wariness, but they showed glimpses of a different man than the one who'd propositioned her at the gala. This Chase was quieter, humbler, almost uncertain in this unfamiliar territory. Near the end of class, as the women practiced breakfalls, Judy lost her balance. Chase half rose, concern flashing across his face, but he caught Rachel's warning look and settled back down. Judy got up on her own, grinning triumphantly at her classmates. "That's what we're here for," Rachel said warmly. "To learn that we're stronger than we think. That falling doesn't mean staying down." She tried not to notice how intently Chase was listening to her words. As class wound down, Chase silently began helping stack the mats against the wall. The women, cooling down with gentle stretches, watched him with growing acceptance. Rachel overheard Maria whisper to Sarah, "Not what I expected from a rich man." Rachel kept her distance, but she couldn't help noticing how carefully Chase handled the equipment, how he stepped back to let others lead, how different he seemed from the polished playboy at the gala. Still, her guard remained up. One morning of good behavior couldn't erase years of reputation or that cruel offer he'd made. The women gathered their belongings, some nodding politely to Chase as they left. He stood awkwardly by the stacked mats, hands in his pockets, waiting until most of the class had gone. Rachel busied herself straightening the already neat stack of attendance sheets, feeling his eyes on her but refusing to acknowledge him first. She had let him observe, but that didn't mean she owed him anything more. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the community center's basketball court as Rachel finished putting away the last of the practice mats. The sound of a bouncing basketball and laughter drew her attention to the open door. Through the doorway, she spotted Chase crouched down beside Danny. His expensive sweater sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His large hands guided Danny's smaller ones on the basketball, demonstrating the proper technique for dribbling. "That's it, buddy. Keep your fingers spread wide, like spider legs, Chase instructed, his voice carrying a warmth Rachel had never heard before. Now bounce it just about waist. High, perfect. Danny's face lit up with pure joy as he managed to maintain control of the ball for several bounces. Look, Mom, I'm doing it. Rachel leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms but unable to suppress a small smile. The scene before her was so different from the arrogant man she'd met at the gala. Chase's perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled now, and his usual calculated expression had melted into something genuine and almost boyish. You're a natural, Chase praised, high-fiving Danny. Want to try moving while you dribble? Danny nodded enthusiastically, his tongue poking out in concentration as he took careful steps forward, the ball bouncing steadily beside him. My dad used to teach me like this, Chase said softly, more to himself than anyone else. Something in his voice made Rachel pause, a hint of old pain, quickly masked as he jogged alongside Danny. Watch out for that crack in the concrete, there you go. The afternoon light caught Chase's profile as he demonstrated a proper stance, and Rachel noticed faint laugh lines around his eyes she'd never seen before. His usual sharp edges seemed softer here, coaching a 7-year-old with infinite patience. Danny stumbled, the ball rolling away, but before he could get discouraged, Chase was there with an encouraging hand on his shoulder. Hey, that happens to the pros too. You should have seen how many times I fell when I was learning. Want to know a secret? Danny nodded eagerly. The most important thing isn't being perfect. It's getting back up and trying again. Chase retrieved the ball and handed it back to Danny. What do you say? One more try? Rachel felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. These weren't the words of the shallow playboy who'd propositioned her at the gala. This man speaking to her son showed glimpses of something deeper, something perhaps buried under years of pretense and privilege. Mom! Danny called out, finally noticing her. Did you see? Chase says I could be on a team someday. I see you working very hard, Rachel replied, careful to keep her voice neutral despite the confusing warmth in her chest. But it's almost dinner time, sweetheart. We should head home. Just 5 more minutes? Danny pleaded, but he was already walking over, the basketball tucked under his arm. Chase straightened up, and Rachel could see him consciously adjusting his demeanor, some of his walls sliding back into place. But there was still something different in his eyes when he looked at her, something uncertain and almost vulnerable. He's got natural talent, Chase said, running a hand through his messy hair. And, more importantly, he's got heart. Rachel nodded, unsure how to respond to this version of Chase. Thank you for being kind to him. He makes it easy, Chase replied simply. And for once, there wasn't a trace of his usual smirk or calculated charm. Later that night, after tucking Danny into bed with dreams of basketball still dancing in his head, Rachel sat cross-legged in her own bed with her worn journal open before her. The lamp cast a soft glow as she began to write. I saw something different in Chase today. The mask slipped, and for a moment, I glimpsed someone else entirely, someone who knows how to be gentle, who understands the value of patience and encouragement, the way he was with Danny. She paused, tapping her pen against the page. But I can't forget who he is. One afternoon of kindness doesn't erase that night at the gala. It doesn't erase his reputation or the way he treats women like commodities. Maybe this softer side is just another technique, another way to get what he wants. Rachel underlined her next words firmly. Keep your guard up. Danny's heart is too precious to risk on maybes. She closed the journal and set it on her nightstand. But the image of Chase's genuine smile as he taught Danny lingered in her mind. The man she'd seen today and the man who'd tried to buy her at the gala seemed like two different people entirely. The question was, which one was real? Rachel stood frozen in the doorway of the community center storage room, her eyes wide as she took in the rows of brand new equipment. Pristine blue practice mats lined the walls, their fresh vinyl smells still lingering in the air. Neatly stacked piles of crisp white uniforms sat on metal shelving, each size carefully labeled. Boxing gloves, punch mitts, and protective gear, all top quality, filled the remaining space. Her heart raced as she picked up one of the uniforms. The fabric felt smooth and sturdy under her fingers, nothing like the worn-out hand-me-downs her students had been using. A small embroidered logo caught her eye. Morgan Self, Defense Academy. Her throat tightened. Ms. Morgan, look what came in. Sarah, one of her teenage students, burst through the door waving a package. There's more boxes outside. Rachel's initial amazement quickly shifted to frustration. There was only one person who could have done this. The same person who had been showing up regularly, trying to buy his way into their lives. Chase, she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. Throughout the morning, her students filtered in for class, their excitement palpable as they discovered the new gear. 8-year-old Maya twirled in her properly fitted uniform, beaming. "Look, Miss Morgan, it's not too big anymore." Mrs. Rodriguez, a grandmother who had been taking classes for months in stretched-out workout clothes, held her new uniform close. "This is too much," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I never thought I could afford one of these." Rachel's anger warred with the joy on her students' faces. She watched as Danny explored the new equipment with his friends, their laughter echoing through the gym. The old mats had been falling apart, held together with duct tape. The previous uniforms had been mismatched and faded, passed down through countless students who couldn't afford their own. During the afternoon children's class, Rachel couldn't help but notice how much safer the new mats felt, how much more confident her students looked in their matching uniforms. Even the youngest kids handled the properly sized training gear with newfound enthusiasm. "Mom, this is amazing," Danny called out as he practiced kicks with his friend Tommy. "It's like a real dojo now." Rachel's chest tightened. It was exactly what she had always wanted for her students, but not like this. Not as some rich man's attempt to throw money at them. Later that evening, as she was closing up, she heard familiar footsteps behind her. Chase stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, trying to look casual but clearly gauging her reaction. "Before you say anything," he started, but Rachel cut him off. "You had no right," she said, her voice controlled but firm. "I told you I didn't want your money." Chase stepped inside, his expression earnest. "The kids needed proper equipment. This isn't about you or me. You can't just sweep in here and—" Rachel gestured at the renovated space, struggling to maintain her anger in the face of what she knew was a genuine improvement for her students. "I saw Tommy practicing last week on those old mats," Chase said quietly. "He fell and hit his elbow on the exposed foam. And Sarah's uniform was so worn out it tore during sparring." Rachel crossed her arms, remembering those incidents all too well. She'd spent countless nights worrying about student safety, applying for grants that never came through, trying to stretch their limited resources. "I know you're proud," Chase continued, running a hand through his hair. "But this isn't charity. It's an investment in these kids' safety, in their dignity." Rachel watched as he walked over to the new equipment, straightening a slightly crooked uniform on its hanger. The gesture was so simple, so careful, so unlike the arrogant Playboy she'd first met at the gala. "You didn't even put your name on anything," she observed, her tone softening slightly. Chase shrugged. "That's not why I did it." The week progressed, and Rachel couldn't deny the impact the new equipment had on her classes. Attendance improved. Students who had been hesitant to invite friends now proudly showed off their training space. Even some of the local mothers who had been skeptical about signing up finally enrolled. She watched Chase interact with the students when he stopped by, noting how he never mentioned the donations, never sought praise or recognition. Instead, he listened to Tommy excitedly explain a new move he'd learned, helped Mrs. Rodriguez adjust her stance, and cheered for Maya when she broke her first board. After Friday's evening class, Rachel found Chase in the storage room, methodically organizing the equipment just as she'd taught him. The sight of him, still in his business suit but with sleeves rolled up, carefully aligning the practice mats, stirred something unexpected in her chest. "Chase," she called softly. He turned, a questioning look on his face. Rachel took a deep breath. "Thank you," she said, the words coming out somewhat stiffly but sincere. "For all of this. The kids, they really needed it." Chase straightened up, his expression surprisingly vulnerable. "I don't want credit," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "I just want to do something that matters." The late afternoon sun streamed through the newly installed windows of the community center, casting a warm glow across the packed gymnasium. Colorful balloons and streamers decorated the walls, and a large banner reading "Morgan Self-Defense Academy Grand Reopening" hung proudly above the stage. Rachel stood near the entrance, greeting the steady stream of visitors with a radiant smile. She wore a crisp new instructor's uniform, the academy's logo embroidered in silver thread over her heart. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, And for once, the worry lines around her eyes had softened into laugh lines. "Rachel, this is amazing," called out Maria, one of her longtime students, now an assistant instructor. She was leading a group of women through a basic self-defense demonstration on the gleaming new practice mats. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as the women executed their moves with confidence and precision. Danny weaved through the crowd, proudly wearing his junior instructor t-shirt and offering bottles of water to guests. "Mom!" he called out, running up to Rachel. "The mayor just arrived." Rachel smoothed her uniform and took a deep breath. The gymnasium was filled beyond capacity. Local business owners, community leaders, former and current students, and curious newcomers all mingling together. The energy in the room was electric. Sarah, now sporting a yellow belt, demonstrated a wrist escape technique to an impressed group of potential students. "This is what helped me get away when someone grabbed my purse last month," she explained, her voice strong and sure. "Ms. Morgan taught us that it's not about strength. It's about technique and confidence." At the refreshment table, elderly Mrs. Chen, who had started taking classes after being mugged, served homemade dumplings to a group of wide-eyed children. "In 6 months, I went from being afraid to leave my house to teaching my granddaughters these moves," she told them with a wink. The renovation had transformed the once shabby space into something remarkable. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new lighting illuminated every corner, and the state-of-the-art equipment gleamed invitingly. But more striking than the physical changes was the sense of community that filled the room. "Time for the ceremony," called out Maria, guiding people toward the rows of chairs facing the small stage. Rachel made her way through the crowd, accepting hugs and congratulations. Her students, wearing their belts of various ranks, formed an honor guard leading to the stage. Each of them stood a little taller, a little stronger than when they'd first walked through the doors. As Rachel climbed the steps to the podium, she caught glimpses of familiar faces. There was Jenny, who'd escaped an abusive relationship and now counseled other survivors. Teresa, who'd overcome her fears to become one of the most dedicated students. Little Katie, who'd stopped being bullied after learning to stand up for herself. The mayor stepped forward first, presenting Rachel with a certificate of recognition for her service to the community. Local news cameras flashed as Rachel accepted it with grace, though public speaking still made her nervous. Danny watched from the front row, beaming with pride. Next to him sat some of Rachel's first students, women who'd started as strangers and become family. They'd helped paint walls, move equipment, and spread the word about classes. Their presence reminded Rachel of how far they'd all come together. Near the back of the room, partially hidden by a support column, stood Chase. He wore a simple, dark suit without his usual flashy accessories. His hands were in his pockets, and a gentle smile played across his face as he watched the ceremony unfold. No one seemed to notice him there, and that appeared to be exactly how he wanted it. Rachel approached the microphone, her heart full. The room fell silent. Hundreds of faces turned expectantly toward her. She unfolded her prepared speech but set it aside, choosing instead to speak from her heart. "When I started teaching self-defense in this building 5 years ago," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I had nothing but a few worn mats and a dream of helping other women find their strength." The crowd listened intently as she continued, her words painting a picture of transformation, not just of the building, but of the lives within it. She spoke of courage, of community, of rising above fear and doubt. With each example, heads nodded in recognition. "This academy isn't about learning to fight," Rachel explained, gesturing to the space around her. "It's about learning to stand tall, to trust yourself, to protect what matters most. It's about building a community where everyone has the right to feel safe and strong." As she thanked the volunteers, the instructors, and the students who believed in her vision, Chase remained in his spot at the back of the room. His smile grew warmer with each word of Rachel's speech, though he made no move to draw attention to himself. The pride in his eyes was evident, but it was different from his old arrogant demeanor. This was quieter, more genuine. The late afternoon sun had shifted, creating a spotlight effect on the stage where Rachel stood. She looked out at the sea of faces, her extended family, really, and felt tears of joy threatening to spill. These were happy tears, tears of accomplishment and gratitude, so different from the worried tears she'd shed over bills just months ago. Danny bounced in his seat, giving his mother 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. The women in the front rows, many of whom had been with Rachel from the beginning, nodded encouragingly. They knew the struggles she'd overcome, the late nights she'd worked, the sacrifices she'd made to keep this dream alive. Chase shifted his weight slightly, maintaining his position in the shadows. His expression was thoughtful as he watched Rachel command the room with quiet authority. The transformation in her was as remarkable as the renovation of the building itself. She stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, embraced her role as a leader with natural grace. Rachel's voice grew stronger as she concluded her speech. Today marks not just a new chapter for our academy, but for every person who walks through these doors seeking change. Together, we're building something stronger than any one of us could create alone. The audience burst into applause, many rising to their feet. Chase clapped quietly from his position at the back, his smile never wavering as he watched Rachel accept the community's love and support. She was in her element now, surrounded by the family she'd built, standing in the space she'd transformed through determination and faith. The sunlight caught the silver threading of Rachel's uniform logo, making it shimmer as she stood on stage, enveloped in the warmth of the moment. Chase remained in his spot, content to witness her triumph from afar, his presence unnoticed but his impact evident in every corner of the renewed academy. The community center's grand reopening had been a resounding success. As the last guests filtered out into the evening, Rachel found herself walking alongside Chase in the parking lot. Danny skipped ahead of them, his boundless energy still going strong despite the long day. "Thank you," Rachel said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "for everything you've done here." She gestured at the renovated building behind them. Chase shuffled his feet, looking almost shy, a stark contrast to the arrogant man she'd first met at the gala. "I didn't do much, just wrote some checks." "No," Rachel shook her head. "You did more than that. You showed up. You helped set up chairs, moved equipment, even mopped floors." She paused, watching Danny attempt a cartwheel on the grass. Would you like to join us for dinner?" "Nothing fancy. Just a simple thank you meal." Chase's eyes widened with surprise. "Are you sure? Mom makes the best spaghetti," Danny called out, having apparently overheard their conversation. He ran back and tugged at Chase's sleeve. "Please come." A genuine smile spread across Chase's face, not the practiced smirk he usually wore at formal events. "How can I say no to that?" 20 minutes later, they pulled up to Rachel's modest two-story home. The paint was slightly faded, but cheerful flowers lined the walkway, and a basketball hoop hung above the garage. Danny immediately dragged Chase to see his collection of sports trophies while Rachel headed to the kitchen. As she prepared dinner, Rachel could hear Danny's excited chatter and Chase's deeper responses floating from the living room. The sound of their laughter was nice, domestic, so different from the tense atmosphere of their first encounters. "Can I help?" Chase appeared in the doorway, rolling up his expensive shirt sleeves. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You know how to cook?" "I can boil water," he offered with a self-deprecating grin. "And I make a mean toast." She couldn't help but laugh. "Here," she handed him a head of lettuce. "You can make the salad. Even you can't mess that up too badly." They worked side by side in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Danny's running commentary about his day. Chase listened attentively, asking questions about Danny's school and his favorite subjects. Rachel noticed how he never talked down to Danny, treating him with genuine respect. The kitchen filled with the aroma of garlic and herbs as Rachel's signature spaghetti sauce simmered on the stove. Chase proved surprisingly competent at salad preparation, though his perfectly diced vegetables betrayed a perfectionist streak. "Where did you learn to cook?" Chase asked, watching her stir the sauce. Rachel's hands stilled for a moment. "My grandmother taught me. After Danny's father left, well, she helped me get back on my feet. Taught me everything she knew about running a household on a tight budget." Chase's face softened with understanding. "She sounds like an amazing woman." "She was." Rachel smiled, remembering. "She always said good food feeds more than just the body. It feeds the soul." When dinner was ready, they gathered around the small kitchen table. Danny insisted on sitting next to Chase, peppering him with questions about his favorite sports teams. Rachel watched as Chase patiently explained the finer points of basketball strategy to her son, using salt and pepper shakers as players. The meal was simple but delicious. Rachel noticed how Chase seemed to relax more with each passing minute, his usual polished facade giving way to something more genuine. He even had a spot of sauce on his collar, something she suspected would have horrified him a few months ago. As the evening wore on, Danny's endless energy finally began to fade. He curled up on the couch between them as they talked about the community center's future plans. Rachel described her vision for expanding the program to include more children's classes, while Chase listened intently, occasionally offering practical suggestions about funding and organization. Mid-sentence, Rachel noticed Danny had dozed off, his head resting against Chase's shoulder. The sight made her pause. Chase sat perfectly still, as if afraid to disturb the sleeping child. His expression was tender, almost wistful. "I should probably get him to bed," Rachel said softly. "Let me help," Chase whispered, carefully gathering Danny in his arms. The boy barely stirred as Chase carried him up the stairs, following Rachel's lead to Danny's bedroom. They tucked Danny into his race car bed, Chase awkwardly but gently pulling the covers up while Rachel switched on the nightlight. As they tiptoed out, Rachel headed to the kitchen to clear the dishes. Through the doorway, she caught sight of Chase standing in the living room, looking at the photos on the wall. His gaze lingered on a picture of Danny at his last birthday party, cake frosting smeared across his grinning face. The longing in Chase's expression was unmistakable, a raw emotion she'd never seen from him before. Rachel's hands stilled over the dishes as she watched him. In that unguarded moment, she saw past the wealthy playboy, past the recent benefactor. She saw a man who perhaps had never known the simple joy of family dinners and bedtime routines. A man who might be learning, just as she was, that redemption often comes in the smallest, most ordinary moment. The dishes could wait. Rachel dried her hands, ready to rejoin Chase in the living room and perhaps learn more about the person he was becoming. Rachel watched from her office as Chase helped Mrs. Martinez, one of her elderly students, perfect her defensive stance. 2 weeks had passed since the reopening, and she still couldn't quite believe the transformation she was witnessing. The man who had once tried to buy her attention with money now spent hours patiently demonstrating basic moves to women who'd initially regarded him with suspicion. "No, like this," Chase said gently, adjusting Mrs. Martinez's elbow. "Keep your arm tight against your body. That's it. Now you've got more power behind the block." The elderly woman beamed. "My grandson won't believe I'm learning all this at my age." "Age is just a number," Chase replied, and Rachel noticed how his smile reached his eyes, something she'd never seen in those early days. "My grandmother was still doing yoga well into her 80s. From the corner of the room, Sarah, one of the domestic abuse survivors, called out, 'Chase, could you check my form too?' Rachel shook her head in amazement. Just last month, Sarah had barely been able to make eye contact with any man. Now here she was, voluntarily asking Chase for help. He'd earned their trust the hard way, through consistency, respect, and genuine care. During water breaks, Rachel overheard snippets of conversation between Chase and the women. He listened intently to their stories, offered encouragement, and never once mentioned his wealth or status. The designer suits were replaced with simple workout clothes, his perfectly styled hair now casually tousled from demonstrations. Danny had taken to following Chase around like a shadow during these sessions, absorbing every move and mimicking his stance. "Look, Mom," he'd call out proudly. "I'm doing it just like Chase." One afternoon, Rachel arrived early to find Chase already there, teaching Danny how to properly wrap his hands before boxing practice. The sight made her heart flutter unexpectedly. The gentle way Chase corrected Danny's technique, the patient explanations, the shared laughter when Danny accidentally tangled the wrap. "He's good with kids," commented Maria, one of her regular students, coming up beside Rachel. "Nothing like what the newspapers say about him." Rachel nodded, watching as Chase let Danny practice light punches against his palms. "People can surprise you," she admitted. The changes extended beyond the center. Chase had started showing up at community events, helping with the local food drive and even joining the neighborhood cleanup initiative. He worked alongside everyone else, picking up trash and painting over graffiti without complaint. One evening, after a particularly challenging class, Chase approached Rachel with an idea. "Some of the women mentioned transportation issues," he said. "What if we set up a carpooling system? I could help coordinate it." Rachel studied him, noting how he didn't immediately offer to throw money at the problem. "That could work," she said slowly. "We'd need to organize volunteers, create a schedule. I've already started a draft." He pulled out a notebook. Not a fancy tablet or smartphone, but an actual spiral-bound notebook with handwritten notes. "Would you look it over?" These small moments of thoughtfulness accumulated day by day. Chase remembered everyone's names, kept track of their progress, and celebrated their achievements, no matter how minor. He noticed when someone was having a rough day and knew when to offer encouragement or simply respectful space. The community began to respond in kind. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery started bringing her famous cookies to class. Mr. Rodriguez, whose wife attended the morning sessions, offered to fix the center's temperamental air conditioning unit free of charge. One particularly memorable evening, Chase stayed late to help Rachel organize new equipment. Danny was sprawled on a mat nearby. Homework spread out around him. "Mom," Danny called out, "I can't figure out this math problem." Before Rachel could move, Chase was already crossing the room. "Want some help, buddy?" he asked, settling down beside Danny. "Math was actually my best subject in school." Rachel watched as Chase broke down the problem into simple steps, using colored markers to make it more engaging. Danny's face lit up with understanding, and something warm bloomed in Rachel's chest. The night air was crisp as they walked home together afterward, Danny bouncing ahead and pointing out constellations he'd learned in science class. Chase and Rachel fell into step behind him, their pace unhurried. "Thank you," Rachel said softly, "for helping with his homework and everything else." Chase's hand swung close to hers as they walked. "I enjoy it," he replied, his voice equally quiet. "Being here, helping out, it feels real." Their fingers brushed accidentally, sending a small shock through Rachel's arm. She quickly pulled her hand away, wrapping it around her middle instead. The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities that Rachel wasn't ready to face. Danny's voice floated back to them. "Look, a shooting star!" His excitement broke the tension, and Rachel forced herself to focus on her son's joy rather than the way Chase's presence made her pulse quicken. She was grateful for the darkness hiding her flushed cheeks, and even more grateful when they reached their front porch. The porch light cast soft shadows across Chase's face as he said goodnight, his expression holding something that made Rachel's heart skip, something she deliberately chose not to name. Rachel hadn't planned to stop at Murphy's Bar and Grill that evening. She'd only ducked in to pick up a takeout order for Danny after a long day at the center. The familiar neighborhood spot was busier than usual for a Wednesday, filled with the after-work crowd unwinding over cold beers and basket-lined burgers. While waiting at the counter, she heard a familiar name that made her pause. "Did you see Chase lately? Man, what happened to him?" A loud voice carried from a corner booth. "He's playing charity case at that community center." Rachel froze, her back to the booth. Through the mirror behind the bar, she could make out two men in expensive suits, their faces flushed from drinking. "Remember that bet?" The second man chuckled, loosening his tie. 50 grand to get that instructor into bed. Never thought he'd actually get invested in her little project instead. The first man snorted. "Chase always did have a flair for the dramatic. Remember how confident he was that night? No woman can resist that kind of money." What a joke. Rachel's hands trembled as she gripped the counter. The room suddenly felt too warm, too cramped. Her throat tightened as pieces clicked into place. Chase's initial approach at the gala, that arrogant offer, his sudden appearance at her center afterward. "Your order's ready, Ms. Morgan," the bartender called out, sliding a paper bag across the counter. But Rachel barely heard him. Her mind raced through every interaction with Chase over the past weeks. His donations, his time with Danny, those quiet conversations that had started to make her believe in second chances. Had it all stemmed from a drunken bet? "Hey, at least he's getting good PR out of it," the second man was saying. "His company's stock is up since all those local hero stories started running." Rachel grabbed her order and hurried out, her cheeks burning. The cool evening air did nothing to calm the storm building inside her. Instead of heading home, she found herself walking toward the center where she knew Chase would be finishing up his evening volunteer shift. The lights were still on inside. Through the window, she could see him mopping the training floor, his sleeves rolled up, tie long, discarded. The sight that had warmed her heart just yesterday now made her feel sick. She pushed through the door hard enough for it to bang against the wall. Chase looked up, startled, then smiled, that genuine smile she'd grown to trust. "Rachel, I thought you'd gone home already. Is everything okay?" Was it all a bet? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The mop handle slipped from Chase's grasp, clattering against the floor. The color drained from his face. What? The $50,000. That night at the gala, Rachel's fists clenched at her sides. Was it all just some game to you and your friends? Chase took a step toward her, hands raised. Rachel, please, let me explain. So it's true. The confirmation hit her like a physical blow. Everything. Coming here, helping with classes, spending time with Danny. It all started because of a bet? Yes, but Chase's voice cracked. It's not what you think. That bet. I was drunk, stupid, showing off to guys I thought were my friends. But the moment you put me in that arm lock, something changed. When I came here to apologize. To apologize? Or to save face because the video went viral? Rachel's voice rose despite her efforts to contain it. The walls she'd carefully lowered over the past weeks slammed back into place. How many people laughed about it, Chase? How many of your wealthy friends watched you play volunteer at my little project? None of that matters anymore. Chase moved closer, desperation clear in his eyes. Everything changed once I met you, really met you. Saw how you help people, how you've raised Danny. The bet was just the beginning. But what happened after was real. Real? Rachel laughed bitterly. How can I believe anything was real when it started with a lie? I trusted you. I let you near my son, Danny. Chase's face crumpled. Rachel, please. What I feel for both of you, don't. Rachel held up a hand, taking a step back. Don't you dare talk about feelings when you treated my life like a game. All those nights I worried about accepting your help, wondering if I was doing the right thing. I should have trusted my first instinct about you. I'm not that man anymore, Chase pleaded. The bet was wrong, horrible. But it led me to something genuine, to people who made me want to be better. You have to believe me. Rachel could see the truth of his pain, the sincerity in his eyes. Part of her wanted to listen, to understand. But the humiliation burned too deeply. All she could think about were those men laughing in the bar, discussing her life like entertainment. I need you to leave. She forced the words out past the tightness in her throat. Don't come back to the center. Don't contact me or Danny. Rachel, just go. She turned away, unable to watch his face crumble further. Please, just go. She listened to his footsteps cross the floor, slow and heavy. The door opened, then closed with a quiet click that seemed to echo in the empty space. Only then did Rachel let the tears fall, sliding down to sit on the mats where she'd taught so many women to stand strong. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, or even the humiliation. It was the small voice inside that whispered she might be making a mistake, that she'd seen real change in Chase over these weeks. But she couldn't listen to that voice, not when every memory was now tainted by the knowledge of how it all began. Rachel sat there in the dimly lit center, surrounded by the equipment Chase had donated and the fresh paint he'd helped apply, wondering how she would explain his absence to Danny. Her son's face would fall when he realized his new friend wouldn't be coming around anymore. Another man walking out of their lives, except this time, she was the one sending him away. The morning sun cast long shadows through the community center's windows, but Rachel couldn't feel its warmth. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages and calls she didn't want to answer. News of Chase's original bet had spread like wildfire through their small community, twisted and magnified with each retelling. She sat at her desk, staring at the latest email from the Thompson Foundation. They were regretfully withdrawing their support due to concerns about the center's leadership. It was the third such email this morning. Miss Morgan? Jenny, one of her teenage students, poked her head into the office. Her eyes were red. Is it true what they're saying? About you and Mr. Whitmore? Rachel's heart ached. People say a lot of things, Jenny. Not all of them are true. My mom says I can't come to classes anymore. Jenny's voice cracked. She says you're not the role model she thought you were. Rachel forced herself to maintain composure, though each word felt like a physical blow. I understand. Thank you for letting me know. After Jenny left, Rachel pulled up her class roster on the computer. 10 cancellations since yesterday. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the growing list of withdrawn memberships. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from her church friend Maria. How could you let that man near our children? We trusted you. Rachel dropped the phone into her desk drawer, unable to bear another message. The walls of her tiny office felt like they were closing in. She needed air. Walking through the gym, she passed the new equipment Chase had donated. The pristine mats, the fresh uniforms hanging in neat rows. All of it now felt tainted. Each item screamed of his deception, of her own foolishness in letting her guard down. Mrs. Chen, one of her longtime students, was waiting by the front desk. The elderly woman's usual warm smile was replaced with concern. "Rachel, dear, I've been hearing such terrible things." "Mrs. Chen, I can explain." "No need to explain." The older woman patted Rachel's hand. "But the community board is concerned. We're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow about the center's future." Rachel's stomach dropped. The community board controlled their building lease. Without their support, everything she'd built could crumble. "I understand," Rachel managed to say, though her throat felt tight. Throughout the day, more students trickled in, not for classes, but to cancel their memberships. Each conversation was a fresh wound. Some were angry, others disappointed. But most just looked at her with that terrible mixture of pity and judgment. By afternoon, her advanced women's self-defense class, usually packed with 20 students, had only 3 participants. Rachel went through the motions of teaching, but her heart wasn't in it. Every time she demonstrated a move, she remembered using that same technique on Chase at the gala. Had he been laughing at her even then, seeing her as nothing but a bet to be won? After class, she found a note slipped under her office door. The local women's shelter was re-evaluating their partnership with the center. The same shelter whose residents she'd trained for free, teaching them to stand strong against their abusers. Danny called from his after-school program, excited about something that happened in class, but Rachel could barely focus on his words. How would she explain to her son that the man he'd grown to trust had been playing them both? Evening came, and Rachel moved through the empty center, turning off lights. The place that had once felt like a sanctuary now echoed with absence. No chatter from waiting students, no thump of bodies practicing falls on the mats, no laughter from the children's class. In the darkening gym, her footsteps seemed too loud. She paused by the wall of photos, women and children beaming after earning their belts, newspaper clippings about the center's work, Danny's crayon drawing of their community family. All of it felt like it was slipping through her fingers. The security lights cast strange shadows across the mats, where she taught hundreds of women to stand up for themselves, where she'd thought she was setting an example of strength and dignity. Now those same women looked at her as if she'd betrayed everything she'd taught them. Rachel's legs felt heavy as she walked to the center of the main mat. Her knees gave way, and she sank down, the familiar texture of the mat pressed against her legs. The truth of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She might lose everything she'd worked for. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she dared to believe someone could change. The automatic timer clicked, and the last set of overhead lights went dark. In the dim glow of the security lights, Rachel bowed her head. She'd always taught her students that true strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up. But right now, kneeling alone in the darkness, she wasn't sure she knew how. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the empty gym, "I need your strength now. I can't do this alone." Chase Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse apartment, staring at the city lights below without really seeing them. The glass of expensive scotch in his hand had gone warm, untouched. His reflection showed a man he hardly recognized anymore. Disheveled hair, wrinkled designer clothes, and dark circles under his eyes. The massive living room stretched behind him, filled with custom furniture and priceless art pieces that now felt as hollow as he did. A cleaning service had just finished, leaving everything spotless and organized, but the perfection only highlighted how empty the space truly was. His phone lay silent on the marble coffee table. No calls, no messages, not since word had spread about the bet. His so-called friends had disappeared, probably laughing about his downfall at some exclusive club. The thought made his stomach turn. He walked over to his leather armchair, sinking into it with a heavy sigh. The chair probably cost more than most people made in a month, but right now it felt like a prison. Everything in this place did. The crystal decanter, the abstract paintings, the Persian rugs, all of it bought to impress people who never really cared about him. "What a joke," he muttered. Finally setting down the untouched scotch, his gaze drifted to the stack of newspapers on the side table. He shouldn't look at them again, but he couldn't help himself. The headlines jumped out like accusations. Local Heroes Center tied to Playboy's scandal. Whitmore airs cruel bet threatens women's program. Each word was a knife twisting in his gut. The worst part wasn't the public shame. He'd weathered scandals before. It was the memory of Rachel's face when she'd confronted him. The hurt in her eyes, the trembling of her voice as she'd ordered him to leave. He'd seen plenty of women cry over him before, but this was different. He'd broken something precious, something real. And Danny. Chase's chest tightened at the thought of the boy. He could still feel the weight of Danny's small hand in his when they'd practiced basketball moves. Hear his delighted laughter when Chase had pretended to fall over during their games. Now he'd never see that smile again. Standing abruptly, Chase paced the length of his living room. The city stretched out below, a sea of lights and possibilities. But he felt trapped in this tower of his own making. The cleaning service had arranged everything perfectly. Magazines fanned out just so, throw pillows at exact angles. But the perfection felt suffocating. His footsteps echoed against the hardwood floors as he wandered into his home office. More luxury surrounded him. A handcrafted desk, leather-bound books he'd never read, framed awards for business deals that now seemed meaningless. His eye caught on something different. A printed photo lying on his desk, dropped off earlier by his assistant before she'd quit. With trembling fingers, Chase picked it up. Someone had snapped it at the community center during the grand reopening. In it, he was kneeling next to Danny, both of them laughing as they tried to untangle some training equipment. Chase was wearing old jeans and a t-shirt instead of his usual tailored suits and his smile. It was real. No practiced charm, no calculated gesture. Just joy. The photo blurred as tears welled in his eyes. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried, probably not since he was Danny's age, before his father had taught him that Whitmore men didn't show weakness. But now, alone in his gilded cage, the tears fell freely. Chase sank into his desk chair, still clutching the photo. The contrast between that moment of genuine happiness and his current solitude was overwhelming. He thought of Rachel's strength, how she'd built something meaningful from nothing while he'd wasted years building nothing from everything. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry." The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. His throat tight with emotion. Chase did something he hadn't done since childhood. He bowed his head to pray. The words came awkwardly at first, then in a rush. "God, I don't know if you're listening. I don't even know if I'm doing this right, but I've made such a mess of everything. I hurt people, good people. I don't know how to fix it. Please, please, help me find a way." His tears fell onto the photo as he prayed, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs in the silence of his empty penthouse. The early morning sun cast long shadows through the community center's windows as Rachel unlocked the front door. Her shoulders felt heavy with the weight of recent events. The once bustling center had grown quieter since donors began pulling away. She paused in the entrance, taking in the familiar scent of vinyl mats and wood floors, wondering how much longer she could keep this place running. An unexpected figure appeared at the bottom of the steps. Chase Whitmore stood there, but he looked nothing like his usual polished self. Gone were the designer suits and carefully styled hair. Instead, he wore worn jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and work boots. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his face carried several days' worth of stubble. Rachel's hand tightened on the door handle. "The center's closed. I know." His voice was quiet, lacking its usual confidence. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to work." She noticed he carried a bucket filled with cleaning supplies. A mop handle stuck out awkwardly from the top. "Work?" Rachel crossed her arms. "What kind of game is this, Chase?" "No game." He set the bucket down carefully. "I want to volunteer. Mopping, repairs, maintenance, whatever you need done. No strings attached." Rachel studied him carefully. The arrogant businessman who'd once tried to buy her was nowhere to be seen. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes focused on the ground rather than meeting her gaze. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. "After everything that's happened?" Chase ran a hand through his unkempt hair. "You shouldn't. I wouldn't." He gestured to the bucket. "But I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking to clean your floors. To fix whatever needs fixing. No money involved. Just work." Rachel's mind flashed to the growing list of maintenance tasks she couldn't afford to hire help for. The broken light in the women's locker room, the squeaky hinges on the emergency exit, the mats that needed deep cleaning. "And what do you get out of this?" she pressed. "Nothing." Chase's voice cracked slightly. "Maybe a chance to do something honest for once in my life." A group of early morning students began appearing at the bottom of the steps, gym bags slung over their shoulders. They stopped short at the sight of Chase, whispering among themselves. Rachel could feel their eyes darting between them. She should send him away. It would be easier, safer. But something in his demeanor made her hesitate. The proud man who'd once towered over everyone was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost. "Fine," she said finally. "The mats need scrubbing. All of them. And don't talk to any of the students." Relief flickered across his face. "Thank you." Rachel held up a warning finger. "One wrong move, and you're out. Understood?" He nodded, picking up his bucket. Rachel led him inside, pointing to the stack of mats in the corner. The students filtered in behind them, their whispers growing more animated as they watched Chase Whitmore, the notorious Playboy whose bet had made local headlines, roll up his sleeves and get down on his knees with a scrub brush. Rachel tried to focus on setting up for her morning class, but her eyes kept drifting to Chase. His movements were methodical as he worked the brush across each mat, his expression one of intense concentration. No shortcuts, no complaints, just steady, honest labor. More students arrived, and the whispers grew louder. Some pointed openly, phones appearing to snap discreet photos. Chase never looked up, just kept scrubbing, his t-shirt growing damp with sweat. "Is that really him?" one of her regular students whispered to Rachel. "What's he doing here?" Rachel watched as Chase moved another heavy mat into position, his muscles straining with the effort. "Working," she said simply. The morning class assembled on the clean mats, stealing glances at the man who continued his task in silence. Chase remained in the corner, head down, focused entirely on his work. The only sounds were the rough scratch of his brush and the splash of soapy water. Rachel began her warm-up routine, trying to maintain normalcy despite the unusual situation. But she couldn't ignore the stark contrast between the Chase Whitmore who had once swaggered into her center offering money, and this humbled version who now knelt on her floors, doing the kind of work his wealthy hands had probably never known. The students continued their furtive glances and whispers, but Chase never acknowledged them. He just kept working, mat after mat, his movements growing slower with fatigue but never stopping. As Rachel led her class through their exercises, she realized this might be the first time in his life he'd done physical labor for someone else's benefit rather than his own. By the time class ended, Chase had worked his way through nearly half the mats. His clothes were soaked with sweat, his hands red from gripping the brush. When the last student left, he finally sat back on his heels, wiping his forehead with his arm. Rachel approached him slowly. "That's enough for today." He shook his head. "I'm not finished. The rest can wait until tomorrow." She paused. "If you're planning to come back." Chase looked up at her then, and she saw something new in his eyes. Not pride or arrogance, or even shame, but a quiet determination. "I'll be here," he said softly. "Same time tomorrow." Rachel nodded, watching as he gathered his supplies with aching movements. He'd worked harder than she'd expected, without complaint or attempt at conversation. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A beginning, maybe. As Chase headed for the door, his shoulders stooped with exhaustion, Rachel called out, "Chase?" He turned. "Bring knee pads tomorrow. The floors here are hard." A ghost of a smile crossed his tired face. He nodded once and walked out into the morning sun, leaving behind a row of spotless mats and a room full of shocked whispers. The first few days felt strange. Students whispered and pointed as Chase methodically swept the community center's floors each morning. His expensive watch was tucked away, replaced by a plain digital timepiece that could handle getting wet. His designer clothes were exchanged for simple workwear that showed growing signs of honest labor. Rachel watched from her office as Chase tackled the center's maintenance list without complaint. He started with the basics, mopping, scrubbing mats, and taking out trash. When the ancient vacuum cleaner died mid-cleaning, he didn't offer to buy a new one. Instead, he spent 2 hours watching YouTube videos on his phone, then took the machine apart on a drop cloth and fixed it himself. By Wednesday, Some of the regular students began greeting him with cautious nods. Chase responded with quiet good mornings, but kept his focus on his work. During the children's afternoon class, a little girl's shoelace came untied. Rather than simply pointing it out, Chase knelt down and showed her how to tie it properly, using the bunny ears method that made her giggle. "My daddy never taught me that," the girl had said. Rachel had seen Chase's hands pause for just a moment before he smiled gently and replied, "Well, now you can teach him." On Thursday, the sink in the women's locker room developed a serious leak. Chase arrived early with a toolbox and crawled under the counter without hesitation. Mrs. Chen, one of Rachel's elderly students, watched him work while she folded clean towels. "You're getting your clothes all dirty," she observed. "Yes, ma'am," Chase replied, his voice muffled as he wrestled with a stubborn pipe. "But clothes can be washed." Mrs. Chen had responded, but Rachel noticed her slipping him a bottle of water when he finally emerged, grimy but successful. Friday morning brought a group of young teens who usually gathered before school. When their basketball got stuck in the outdoor hoop's net, Chase grabbed a ladder without being asked. The kids watched, impressed, as he carefully freed the ball, and then spent 20 minutes showing them proper shooting technique. "Man, you're actually pretty cool," one boy said, then quickly looked embarrassed at his own words. Chase just passed him the ball. "Your follow-through is getting better. Keep practicing." Throughout the week, Rachel noticed small changes in the community's attitude. The hostile whispers decreased. People began making eye contact with Chase instead of avoiding him. A few of the single moms even thanked him when he helped carry their heavy bags to their cars after evening classes. The most noticeable transformation was in Chase himself. His movements became more natural, less stiff with self-consciousness. The dark circles under his eyes gradually faded. He started bringing his lunch in a brown paper bag instead of disappearing to expensive restaurants. Sometimes Rachel caught him sitting alone in the gym during breaks, just looking around with an expression of quiet contentment. When Saturday morning's children's class arrived, Chase was already there, setting up the warm-up area. Without being asked, he led the kids through their stretching routine, showing surprising patience as he corrected their form and praised their efforts. Rachel watched from the doorway as several parents observed the scene with thoughtful expressions. "He's different now," one mother murmured to another. "Something's changed in him." That evening, as Rachel was finishing up paperwork, Mrs. Chen knocked on her office door. The elderly woman had been coming to gentle exercise classes for years, and Rachel always valued her wisdom. "A moment of your time?" Mrs. Chen asked, settling into the chair across from Rachel's desk. "Of course." Rachel set aside her papers. "Is everything all right?" Mrs. Chen nodded, her eyes twinkling. "I've been watching that young man all week, the rich one who now scrubs our floors." Rachel tensed slightly. "Chase? Has he bothered you?" "Oh no, dear." Mrs. Chen waved her hand dismissively. "Quite the opposite. You know, I've lived long enough to see many people try to change. Most of them just want to look like they're changing. But him?" She glanced toward the gym where Chase was putting away the last of the equipment. "He's doing the hard work, the kind that hurts your pride more than your hands." Rachel followed her gaze, watching as Chase carefully aligned the yoga mats on their shelf, making sure each one was perfectly straight. Mrs. Chen continued softly, "Maybe God sent him here to change, not just for his own sake, but for all of us, to remind us that grace is real." The words settled in Rachel's chest like a warm weight. She looked at her longtime student, not quite sure how to respond. Mrs. Chen patted her hand and stood up. "Just something to think about, dear. See you Monday." Rachel remained at her desk long after Mrs. Chen left, watching through her office window as the last rays of sunlight painted the gym floor golden. Chase's shadow moved across it as he finished his evening tasks, unaware of being observed. His movements were unhurried, careful, and for the first time, Rachel allowed herself to truly see how much he had changed. The community center's main hall buzzed with tension as residents gathered for the monthly town meeting. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across worried faces. Everyone knew why attendance was double the usual tonight. The scandal involving Chase Whitmore and Rachel Morgan's community center had become the talk of the town. Rachel sat in the back row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She hadn't known Chase would be here, yet there he was, wearing simple work clothes, still bearing paint stains from fixing the center's walls earlier that day. Gone was the cocky businessman who had first strutted into her life. This Chase looked tired, humble, and genuinely nervous. Mayor Thompson was reviewing the month's agenda when Chase raised his hand. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying across the room despite its softness. "I'd like to address the community if I may." The mayor hesitated, then nodded. "The floor is yours, Mr. Whitmore." Chase walked to the front, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He gripped the podium, knuckles white, and took a deep breath. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with where to begin. "Most of you know me as Chase Whitmore," he started, his voice slightly shaky. "Or maybe you know me as that rich jerk who tried to proposition Rachel Morgan at the charity gala, the one she put in his place with a perfect arm lock." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd. "What you don't know is the full story, and you deserve to hear it." Chase paused, swallowing hard. "That night at the gala, I wasn't just being arrogant. I was participating in something much worse. I had made a bet with some so-called friends, $50,000 his voice cracked, to seduce Rachel Morgan." Gasps and angry mutters filled the room. Rachel's face remained carefully neutral, though her fingers dug deeper into her palms. "It was cruel, it was heartless, and it showed exactly who I was back then. Someone who thought money could buy anything. Someone who treated people like toys." Chase's eyes grew wet, but he pressed on. "When Rachel took me down that night, she did more than just embarrass me. She shattered everything I thought I knew about power and respect." He looked down at his hands, now calloused from manual labor. "I came to her center to apologize. But what I found there changed my life. I saw real strength, not in money or status, but in service. In Rachel teaching assault survivors to reclaim their power. In single moms working 2 jobs but still making time to learn self-defense. In kids finding confidence through martial arts." The room had grown absolutely still. Even those who had come ready to condemn Chase were listening intently. For the first time in my life, I saw what really matters. And yes, I started helping with donations. But more importantly, I started learning. Learning that true worth isn't in a bank account. It's in the smile of a child who finally masters a move. It's in the tears of joy when a woman realizes she's stronger than she thought. It's in the quiet dignity of someone like Rachel, who gives everything she has to lift others up. Chase's voice grew stronger, though tears now rolled freely down his face. "I know many of you have pulled your support from the center because of me. Because you heard about the bet and assumed Rachel was somehow involved in my schemes. But she never was. She's the one who showed me what integrity looks like. She's the one who inspired me to change." He straightened up, facing the crowd directly. "The center needs your support, not because of me, but in spite of me. Those women and children deserve your help. And as for me," Chase took another deep breath, "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." The room fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the muffled sniffle from someone in the middle rows. Chase stood there, exposed and vulnerable, waiting for judgment. The street lights cast long shadows across the community center's parking lot as night settled over the quiet suburb. Rachel's footsteps echoed in the empty space as she approached the building for her nightly lockup routine. She hadn't expected to find anyone there at this hour, especially not after such an emotionally charged town meeting. But there he was. Chase Whitmore sat on the concrete steps leading to the center's entrance, his usually pristine suit jacket draped carelessly beside him. His shoulders slumped forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he stared at the ground. He looked completely drained, nothing like the arrogant businessman who had first walked into her life. Rachel paused, her keys jingling softly in her hand. The sound made Chase look up, and in the harsh glow of the security lights, she could see the raw vulnerability etched across his face. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair disheveled from running his fingers through it too many times. "I didn't expect to find you here," Rachel said softly, taking a few steps closer. Chase attempted a weak smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I couldn't go home yet. Too quiet there. Too empty." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I keep replaying everything in my head, not just tonight, but all of it. Who I was, what I did." Rachel stood quietly for a moment, then moved to sit beside him on the steps. leaving a respectful distance between them. The concrete was cold through her dress, but she barely noticed. "That took courage," she said finally. "What you did in there," Chase shook his head. "Courage? No, it was the least I could do. Should have done it weeks ago." He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands. "You know what scared me most? Not the judgment or the whispers. It was seeing your face when I told the whole story. Having to watch you relive that horrible night when I—" "Stop," Rachel interrupted gently. "Yes, that night was awful. But that's not who you are anymore." "How can you be so sure?" His voice cracked slightly. "Sometimes I'm not even sure myself." Rachel thought carefully before speaking. "Because the Chase Whitmore I met that first night would never have spent hours mopping these floors." She gestured to the building behind them. "He wouldn't have taught little Katie Peterson how to do a proper stance when she was struggling in class. He wouldn't have fixed Mr. Johnson's car when it broke down in the parking lot." Chase listened silently, still fidgeting with the stone. "And he certainly," Rachel continued, her voice growing softer, "wouldn't have stood up in front of the whole town and stripped away every layer of his pride just to tell the truth." "I've hurt so many people," Chase whispered, "especially you and Danny." His voice caught on the boy's name. Rachel shifted slightly, turning to face him better. "You know what I've learned teaching self-defense all these years? True strength isn't about never falling down. It's about how you get back up." She paused, watching his profile in the dim light. "You're not that man anymore, Chase. I've watched you change." He finally looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "How can you even stand to be near me after what I did? That bet." The disgust in his voice was palpable. "Because I believe in grace," Rachel said simply. "And because I've seen your heart change. You didn't just throw money at us to make yourself feel better. You showed up. You worked. You learned humility." She took a deep breath. "That's why I forgive you." Chase's breath caught audibly. "Rachel, I'm not forgiving you because you're perfect now," she continued. "I'm forgiving you because you're sincere, because you're trying, really trying, not just for show." Tears welled in Chase's eyes as he absorbed her words. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the stone he'd been holding. "I don't deserve it," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "That's exactly why you do," Rachel replied quietly. "Because you understand that now." Chase bowed his head, overwhelmed by the weight of her forgiveness. His shoulders shook slightly as he whispered, "Thank you." The words carried years of pain, regret, and now, finally, hope. Rachel reached out and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, offering silent support as the man before her finally allowed himself to feel the full impact of redemption. Sunlight streamed through the freshly cleaned windows of the community center, casting warm rectangles across the newly refinished hardwood floors. Rachel stood in the doorway of her office, watching as Chase meticulously arranged a row of gleaming trophies from past student competitions on a shelf they'd mounted together the day before. "A little to the left," Rachel suggested, unable to hide her smile as Chase adjusted the display with the same careful attention he once gave to million-dollar business deals. "Like this?" Chase stepped back, wiping his hands on his faded jeans, so different from the designer suits he used to wear. The change in his appearance matched the transformation in his heart. The phone on Rachel's desk rang again, the fourth time that morning. Ever since Chase's public confession at the town meeting, interest in the center had surged. People were touched by his honesty and humility, and more importantly, by the visible changes in him. "Another new registration," Rachel announced after hanging up. "That's 15 new students this week alone." Chase's face lit up with genuine joy, not the smug satisfaction he might have shown in his old life, but something pure and earned. "That's amazing, Rachel. Your dream is really happening." "Our dream now," she corrected softly, surprising herself with how natural those words felt. The morning light caught the silver in Chase's temples. Stress earned strands that somehow made him more handsome, more real. He'd stopped dyeing his hair, another small symbol of his commitment to authenticity. Down the hall, the sound of children's laughter echoed as Danny led a group of his friends through their warm-up exercises. The kids program had become one of their most popular offerings, with Danny proudly serving as junior assistant instructor. "Mrs. Peterson called," Rachel said, sorting through some papers. "The church group wants to sponsor 5 more single moms for the self-defense program." Chase nodded, his eyes soft with understanding. "I'll make sure we have enough uniforms and equipment ready." He paused, then added, "And before you protest, I'm not buying them. I'm fixing up the old ones. These hands need the work." Rachel watched those hands, capable of both destruction and creation, as they carefully straightened a framed photo of their first graduating class. She remembered how those same hands had trembled during his confession at the town meeting, how they'd steadied only when he'd committed himself to honest work. The morning passed in a blur of activity. New students arrived for orientation, their faces bright with hope. Chase led them through basic safety procedures while Rachel demonstrated techniques, their teaching styles complementing each other naturally. Where she was technical and precise, he offered encouragement and practical tips from a beginner's perspective, having learned these same moves himself not so long ago. During the lunch break, Rachel found Chase in the supply room, organizing donations from local businesses. The community support had been overwhelming since his public apology. People recognized genuine change when they saw it. "The Saturday morning class is completely full," Rachel reported, helping him sort through boxes of training gear. "We might need to add another session." "Whatever you need," Chase replied, then caught himself with a self-deprecating smile. "I mean, whatever we decide together, I'm still learning not to bulldoze ahead with solutions." Rachel touched his arm gently. "You're doing fine. Better than fine." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Rachel saw not the arrogant playboy who had once tried to buy her, but a man rebuilt from the ground up, someone who had faced his demons and chosen a better path. The afternoon advanced with a steady stream of classes. Rachel watched proudly as her advanced students helped newcomers, the spirit of community stronger than ever. Chase moved through the groups, adjusting stances here, offering words of encouragement there, his presence no longer causing whispers of scandal but nods of respect. As the last adult class of the day wrapped up, the children's group filed in for their session. Danny bounded across the room, his white uniform crisp and neat, a gift he'd earned through his own hard work helping at the center. Rachel led the children's class while Chase assisted, his tall frame comical next to the little ones as he demonstrated basic blocks and strikes. The kids adored him, especially when he played the role of practice dummy, letting them practice their moves while he pretended to be dramatically defeated. After the final bow, as parents began arriving to pick up their children, Danny rushed across the mat, his face glowing with excitement from a particularly good practice. Without hesitation, he launched himself at Chase, who caught him in a practice motion that spoke of many such enthusiastic greetings. "Daddy, did you see my front kick? It was just like you showed me." Danny's voice rang out clear and proud in the busy room. The word hung in the air for a moment. Chase's arms tightened around Danny, his eyes filling with tears he didn't try to hide. The surrounding parents and students fell quiet, witnessing this unscripted moment of pure love. Rachel watched as Chase hugged Danny close, his face a mirror of wonder and gratitude. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I saw it, buddy. It was perfect." The autumn breeze rustled through the changing leaves as Rachel watched from her kitchen window. Chase was in the backyard, patiently teaching Danny how to throw a spiral with a football. She smiled, remembering how different things had been just 6 months ago. "Keep your fingers on the laces, buddy," Chase instructed, kneeling beside Danny to adjust his small hands on the ball. "That's it now. Follow through like we practiced." Danny's face scrunched in concentration as he threw the ball. It wobbled through the air but went straight enough to reach Chase's waiting hands. "I did it!" Danny jumped up and down, his eyes bright with excitement. "That was perfect!" Chase grinned, tossing the ball back gently. "You're going to be the star quarterback before you know it." Rachel wiped her hands on a dish towel and stepped onto the back porch. "Sorry to interrupt the training session, but dinner's ready." "Just 5 more minutes, Mom?" Danny pleaded, already positioning himself for another throw. Chase caught Rachel's eye, and she noticed the contentment in his expression so different from the arrogant mask he'd worn when they first met. "Your mom's been cooking all afternoon, champ." "Let's not keep her waiting." At the dinner table, Danny chatted excitedly about his day at school while Rachel served the lasagna. Chase helped him cut his portions into manageable bites, a small gesture that would have seemed impossible from the old Chase Whitmore. "And then in art class," Danny continued between mouthfuls, "I drew our family for the bulletin board. Ms. Thompson said it was really good." Rachel's heart warmed at the way Chase's eyes softened at the word family. He'd been coming to dinner 4 nights a week now, helping with homework, and attending every one of Danny's Little League games. The community center was flourishing too, with Chase handling the business side while Rachel focused on teaching. "Oh, that reminds me," Chase said, reaching for his phone. "The contractor finished the plans for the center's expansion. Want to see?" Rachel leaned closer as he pulled up the blueprints. Their shoulders touched, and she felt the familiar flutter in her stomach that she'd stopped trying to ignore. The plans showed a beautiful new wing with additional classroom space and a proper locker room. "The best part," Chase explained, "is that we can build it without disrupting any of the current classes. The women's shelter program can keep running through construction." "You've thought of everything," Rachel said softly, touched by his dedication to her vision. "I learned from the best." Chase's hand found hers under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. After dinner, they fell into their comfortable routine. Danny worked on his math homework at the kitchen table, while Chase explained multiplication tricks. Rachel packed lunches for tomorrow, smiling as she heard their playful banter. "Time to get ready for bed, sweetie," Rachel called when she noticed Danny trying to hide his yawns. "Can Chase help me with my pajamas?" Danny asked, already heading for the stairs. Rachel nodded, watching as Chase followed Danny up to his room. These moments still amazed her how naturally Chase had stepped into their lives, how completely he'd transformed from the man who once thought money could buy anything. She could hear them upstairs, the sound of running water as Danny brushed his teeth, Chase's deep voice reading a bedtime story, Danny's delighted giggles at the funny voices Chase used for different characters. Rachel finished cleaning up the kitchen and climbed the stairs quietly. She paused in Danny's doorway, not wanting to interrupt the tender scene before her. Chase sat on the edge of Danny's bed, tucking the covers around him with gentle care. "Chase?" Danny's voice was sleepy but serious. "Yeah, buddy? You're the best daddy ever." Danny's words were followed by a soft yawn as he snuggled deeper into his pillow. Rachel watched as Chase's shoulders tensed, then trembled slightly. He pulled Danny close, and she could see him fighting back tears as he held their son. The sight brought tears to her own eyes, this man who had once seemed so shallow, now overflowing with genuine love. Danny was already drifting off to sleep, but Chase stayed there, one hand smoothing Danny's hair, his other wiping quickly at his eyes. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the scene, and Rachel's heart felt full to bursting with gratitude for this unexpected gift of love that had transformed all their lives. The elegant chandeliers cast a warm glow across the ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Rachel smoothed her new burgundy dress, a far cry from last year's second-hand cocktail attire, and squeezed Chase's hand. He looked down at her with a gentle smile, so different from the arrogant smirk he'd worn in this same room exactly 1 year ago. "Ready?" he whispered, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Rachel took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." They stepped through the grand double doors together. The familiar buzz of conversation dimmed for a moment as heads turned their way. Rachel felt Chase's hand tighten slightly around hers, not from pride this time, but from the humility of knowing their story was common knowledge. "Rachel, Chase!" Martha Collins, one of Rachel's longtime students, waved from across the room. She hurried over, resplendent in a blue evening gown. "The center's table is right up front this year. Thanks to you," Rachel smiled, hugging her friend. Martha had become one of their strongest supporters after Chase's public confession, rallying other donors back to their cause. As they made their way through the crowd, Rachel noticed the difference in how people approached them now. Gone were the scandalized whispers and judgmental stares. Instead, genuine warmth filled the greetings they received. Several of Rachel's students had been invited this year, their success stories making them honored guests rather than charity cases. "Mr. Whitmore," an elderly gentleman called out, "My wife just started classes at the center. She hasn't stopped talking about how much confidence she's gained." Chase's face lit up with genuine pride, not in himself, but in their work. "That's wonderful to hear, sir. Rachel's the real expert, though. I just mop the floors and fix the equipment." Rachel smiled, remembering how he'd started with those humble tasks, earning trust one clean mat at a time. Now he taught beginner fitness classes and helped with administrative work, but he never lost that servant's heart he'd developed. The evening progressed with dinner and speeches. When it came time for the charitable giving portion, Rachel felt tears prick her eyes as she watched various community members step forward to support not just their center, but other worthy causes as well. Chase's example of transformation had sparked a wave of genuine giving throughout the town. "Would you like to dance?" Chase asked softly as the band struck up a slow melody. Rachel nodded, letting him lead her to the dance floor. His hand rested respectfully at her waist, nothing like the entitled way he'd invaded her space a year ago. "I keep thinking about Danny," Rachel admitted as they swayed to the music. "Remember how worried I was about leaving him with your sister tonight? Now he adores his Aunt Sarah's game nights." Chase chuckled. "She spoils him rotten, but he deserves it, they both do. Sarah said having him around has helped her heal too, from our rough childhood." Rachel laid her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "It's amazing how God works things out, isn't it? Even the hardest moments led us here." "I think about that night all the time," Chase murmured. "How arrogant I was. How lost. I thought I had everything figured out, but I was so empty inside. And now? Now?" His voice grew thick with emotion. "Now I have everything that actually matters. Purpose, family, love." He pulled back slightly to meet her eyes. "You and Danny showed me what real wealth looks like." They danced a while longer, greeting well-wishers between songs. As the evening wound down, Chase suggested they stop by the center on their way home. Rachel agreed, knowing he'd like to check the security system personally each night. The streets were quiet as they pulled into the parking lot. The center's new sign glowed softly in the darkness. Morgan Whitmore Community Center, Strength Through Unity. Chase used his key to let them in, automatically reaching for the light switch. Rachel caught his hand. "Leave them off for a minute?" He nodded, understanding her mood. Moonlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the fresh paint and new equipment. But more importantly, it highlighted the wall of photos, students graduating from various programs, children learning self-defense, families growing stronger together. "Remember when this place was falling apart?" Rachel ran her hand along the smooth wall. "Now look at it. Look at us," Chase added softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I came here thinking I could fix everything with money. Instead, this place fixed me." Rachel turned in his embrace, looking up at the man who'd learned to truly see others, to serve without expecting praise, to love without conditions. "You know what I was praying for that night Danny overheard me?" "What's that?" "I asked God to send someone who would love Danny the way he deserves. Not just as a father figure, but as someone who would help shape his heart." She touched Chase's cheek gently. "I think God answered my prayer." The community center's security lights cast a soft glow around them as Chase lowered his head to kiss her, a kiss full of gratitude, commitment, and the quiet joy of two hearts finally at peace. They were more than just two people now. They were a family, bound together by grace, forgiveness, and love that had been tested and proven true. In the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. But neither Rachel nor Chase moved to leave just yet. They stood together in the gentle light of their shared dream, surrounded by the evidence of what could happen when pride gave way to purpose, and when two unlikely hearts found their way home. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Rachel Morgan, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.